In this video, we'll be looking at types 2, 4, and 9. And the differences between the subtypes are a little bit stronger than those of types 3, 7, and 8, but it's still less than what we will see among types 1, 5, and 6. Now let's start with type 2, which is known as the seducer. In general, 2s are very good at seducing, but they tend to be pretty bad at flirting. Seducing is not only a tool for finding a long-term or a sexual partner, but they may also use it as some kind of socialization or a manipulation tool. Seducing is part of the tools that 2s use as a defense mechanism of their ego. They use it to create some kind of close emotional connection and to make other people somehow dependent upon them. And they can use their charm and attractiveness actually to make sure that people are going to like them. Now this all happens subconsciously, and 2s don't like the word seducing for their own behavior. They prefer it to be called something like charming, and also flirting they would prefer to see something like making connections. So let's start with the question: who do 2s flirt with, and who do they actually want to conquer? Well, 2s are not interested in just anybody. Somehow deep inside themselves, 2s believe that their own status and value and importance depends on that of their partners. So that's why they're most often going to look for the most sought after man or woman, even if that person may be unavailable or unattainable. Because they want to get the admiration of somebody who's like the most important in their view. Now, what does this most sought after mean? Well, that's going to depend a lot on the social group in which the 2 is going to find him or herself. So for some people this may mean somebody who has a lot of power or who's high in the social ladder. For other 2s it may mean they're looking for the best looking or the funniest or the richest. And it is indeed sometimes also somebody who has a lot of power. Now, the interesting thing here is that sometimes 2s are chasing somebody that they actually don't really like. They're just interested in the social status and prestige of that person. So the partner they want to be with would just be some kind of conduit for their own social aspirations. Again, this is not something that applies to all 2s, but it's something you can notice with them from time to time. And it doesn't mean that they don't care really about that person. Yes, I mean, they will be able to try to take care of that person, and they're actually going to try to control that person. So it's very interesting that when they look for somebody who has power, it's more of a crippled power. They still want to be able to dominate that prospective partner. Now, there's also 2s who are actually looking not for people who are rich or anything like that. They may be interested in people who are financially doing very poorly, so that they can actually take care of them. So let's take the example. I mean, you may have a 2 who's very much attracted to a poor and eccentric, but a very well-known painter. And then this 2 can actually take care of that painter. Another interesting thing is that 2s believe that they can get anybody. They think they can get whoever they want. They can actually get some kind of thrill out of pursuing somebody who looks unattainable. So how does type 2 seduce? The first aspect is attunement and shape-shifting. 2s are really brilliant at sensing the emotional state of the other person and adapting to them to meet these emotional needs. So for example, if the other person wants to have a light discussion with lots of laughing, then the 2 is going to create this very light-hearted image. And if the other person wants to have a very serene and deep discussion, then the type 2 is going to really adapt and respond with lots of understanding and care. And the 2 is really going to say what the partner says, smile when the partner smiles, and they will mimic the body language, and they may also promise things without actually delivering on them. So the main aim is actually to make the other person feel good about themselves. The main issue is about creating an emotional connection which is so strong that the other person is going to open up and relax very easily. And so the other person is going to share all his or her problems and is going to tell things in confidence. So the two is creating some kind of emotional dependency. So actually, twos could be very good spies. Again, all of this happens subconsciously. And although the main focus of the two is to create some kind of emotional intimacy, there is no true intimacy, because the two is not telling much about him or herself. The two is not being vulnerable towards the other person. Now, a second strategy that twos like to use is by taking care of the other person. And this can take different ways and shapes. I mean, one is cooking for the other person. It can be listening to them. It can be giving excessive compliments. Can be some kind of physical touch, or it can even be offering to do some domestic tasks. So for example, when a two meets a person and would like to make a very good impression, he or she may just offer to do the dishes for this person, although they're not living together yet. So this taking care can sometimes be overly generous. So twos tend to move into the personal space of the other person too much. They can actually be a little bit invasive. Twos are actually as invasive as type 8s, but they actually do it in a very pleasant way. They create dependency, they put themselves in control, but they do it in a nicer way. And if you actually object to this kind of strategy, then you can easily be seen as being very rude or being very unthankful to the two who's just trying to be helpful to you. Now, of course, less healthy twos can actually suffocate their prospective partner by giving this excessive care. And basically, there is no escape possible for this prospective partner. So in general, twos have a very active flirting or seduction style. They take the lead. And the sexual two is, of course, the most aggressive of all of them. They're the true pursuer. Still, twos tend to be slightly introverted, and typically they're not going to try to flirt or seduce somebody in a bar or in a disco or something like that, just because it's a place, it's a setting that doesn't really allow for creating a deep connection. Twos want to be in the lead because at the end of the day they want to be in control. If somebody else takes the first steps, they're no longer in control. And the other thing is that they somehow don't like when others take the first steps because there's something suspicious about it. If I am a two, then I want to flirt or seduce somebody who's actually more important than I am. So if somebody is flirting with me, they use the same logic. If somebody flirts with me, then I am probably more important, more sought after, then why would I be with this person? And this actually explains part of why type 2 often wants to get the love of those who don't love them and devalues and rejects the love of those who give it to them. They don't like it when somebody flirts with them, and often they don't want to reciprocate. And when they do so, they're going to make it very clear. They'll be very direct, blunt, undiplomatic. They can actually be arrogant and really look down at the other person. So really, twos don't care about people who are unimportant in their views, and they can actually devalue the love of those people that are giving it to them. Now, although twos are very active in flirting, they do so in a very subtle and cautious way. They try to create some kind of physical proximity. They will try to be pleasant, funny, interesting, and they will change their voice. And they will really be careful not to make a fool out of themselves. So they're taking it really step by step. Very often they're flirting by closely listening and by identifying points of connection. And something that's also very important to them is that they like to play hard to get, because they don't want to come across as easy. Of course, again, all of this happens at a very subconscious level. Another important and interesting thing is that 2s focus more on their own sexual attractiveness than on whether the partner is actually sexually appealing, because it's all about them. It's about them wanting to be liked, actually. So also in their interactions, 2s tend to hold eye contact. They may touch their hair in a sensual manner, and also male 2s do that. And 2s can be pretty active in the beginning, but if they see that the partner is actually not reciprocating, they may lose interest. I mean, in some cases, they may really chase somebody who's unavailable, but in some cases, if they somehow feel that this is a lost case, they're just going to lose interest and they're just going to end it. Of course, sometimes they may project their own insecurities and they may misinterpret certain signs incorrectly. But basically, for a 2 to be very open and say that they really like a person and that they would like to have a relationship with this person, the interest of the other side has to be very, very obvious. They just do not want to make a fool out of themselves. Now, when 2s are in a setting where other people are trying to get the attention from a prospective partner, the seduction attempts of the 2 will become very mellow and they may even disappear. Basically, 2s don't want to compete in public, because if they lose, that would be a failure, and the rejection and the whole public image that they would have would just suffer too much. So they don't want to go there. Now, finally, quite some 2s in our Western society can easily use sex as a tool for conquering the other person. They can use sex as a way of seducing the other person into a relationship. Many 2s tend to have weak sexual boundaries, and they may actually not be aware that they actually didn't want to have sex with the other person. Basically, they just wanted to get so close to the other person, they wanted to really feel that they're being loved, and they just end up having sex with the person, and then after that they may actually feel bad about that. Of course, not all 2s are like that, and there is also many 2s who have certain values about sex and that they wait with sex until marriage. Now let's maybe end type 2 with looking at some of the differences among the subtypes. Clearly, the sexual 2 is the most outwardly seductive. The female sexual 2 can be really a femme fatale. The self-preservation 2 is more cautious and less assertive. They're also more introverted quite often. And they take more this wait and see approach. Very often this is also because they lack some kind of self-confidence. However, when they're pretty sure that they will get that person, they're going to take a very active stance. Now, the social 2 may not only want to seduce the partner, but they will also care a lot about their own status. They really want to be perceived as being professional and competent. Let's move on to type 4. Now, there is a very interesting dichotomy or contradiction in this type. From one side, this is a withdrawn type, right? So 4s are unlikely to be really assertive or active in taking the first step in terms of flirting. On the contrary, they want the other person to take the initiative. 4s basically want to be noticed by being absent. They want to be noticed for their own withdrawal. But so if somebody starts flirting with them and they feel emotionally okay, then they will reciprocate. But if they feel the other person is a little bit too strong, too dominant, too much invading their personal space. Sometimes they may just shy away. But at the same time as having this withdrawal, type 4s can be wildly expressive and dramatic in their attention seeking. And of course there's quite some differences between the subtypes. So the sexual 4 is going to be much more intense, direct and bold in flirting. The self-preservation 4 is going to be less bold, and the social 4 will find him or herself somewhere in between. Something very important about type 4 is their permanent romanticization and idealization. And this also applies to flirting. So for example, if you would ask a 4 and a partner of the 4 how they met, you're probably going to hear two completely different stories. The 4 is probably going to say, oh well, we were in this bar with this very nice setting, and our eyes caught each other and we could feel each other's heartbeat, and there was this immediate soul connection. And so you will hear a very nice, romantic, idealized story. When you then ask the partner is probably going to say, oh yeah, we just were meeting in a bar, she was a friend of my friend and that's how we hooked up. So you'll probably hear different stories. Now, this idealization also shows up in the relationships. Very often it all starts as a very romantic story, and they believe that the partner is just perfect. But then very quickly after that, they just get disappointed and melancholic when they see that the person is not living up to this image they had created themselves. 4s can be attracted to somebody with a very attractive and nice body, for sure, but often they can find this to be something like superficial. They will claim that they're more attracted to the aura of the person. They want to connect with somebody on a more emotional and or spiritual level, whatever this spiritual level may actually mean. 4s can also be attracted to people who have some kind of rescuer quality. Many 4s have this inherent feeling of being broken, this feeling of deficiency, this sense that there's some kind of wild and crazy being that cannot be contained, so they hope that this other person is going to rescue and save them. 4s can very easily fall in love, and they will equally easily fall out of lust. The attraction to a person can just happen in an instant and disappear an instant later again. So there is this instantaneous idealization and a very quick disappointment following it, very often. So the flirting style of type 4 can be quite coquettish and odd. They're very much alternating between hot and cold, dominant and sweet, innocent and insulting, accepting and rejecting. So it's really this push-pull dynamics, which comes very, very natural to them. So they don't do this in a playful way on purpose. And again, some people may like it, some don't like it. With regards to clothing and the looks, quite differently to other types, 4s don't really care about looking hot. 4s want to look who they are. Sometimes this can be stylish, but for other people this can be completely the opposite. 4s basically want people to see them for who they are, and they only want to get the attention of those who find them attractive the way they are, without having to put any extra efforts in the way they look. But in reality, the look of the 4, which may sometimes be eccentric, is not a matter of coincidence. Very often it is very carefully chosen and it's very carefully crafted, because the 4 can sometimes spend an hour, 2 hours just to look somehow different and unique. And indeed, this refers to the image of authenticity. 4s strive to have this image of authenticity, and they boldly want to be themselves. They don't want to comply with expectations. They want to be genuine and honest. They don't want to hide anything. They just want to be themselves. And indeed, somebody who's very honest and themselves can be very appealing. But in reality, as we already saw, the 4 can exaggerate this attempt to be authentic. They may strive so much to be unique that they're no longer genuine and honest. And this alleged honesty can be some kind of fake authenticity, you could say. And in the case of unhealthy 4s, this can even look in such a way that they gain some kind of pride from their alleged deficiency. They can really try to be unique by saying how horrible everything is. Maybe one example of how 4s love this brutal honesty also in others is how a female social 4 was saying that she was sitting in a restaurant and somehow she established eye contact with somebody on another table. And when she went to the toilet, this guy also went to the toilet, and there he went over to her and said, "You look amazing, I want to have sex with you." Now, most women would be completely shocked and they would probably slap the guy in the face. But she found this awesome and she was really impressed by his honesty. Now, for those of you who are interested in the end of the story, no, she did not sleep with him because she was in a long-term committed relationship. But she just appreciated that this guy was so direct towards her. Now, there's another very interesting inner dynamic in the type 4's flirting. Very often 4s feel somehow deficient, ugly, shy, stupid. But when they flirt with somebody, or when somebody flirts with them, they suddenly open up and they feel beautiful, they feel sexy, their body comes to life, they feel free, and they really have this physical sensation of being so special. Now, of course, there are also 4s who flirt by actively displaying their own flaws and deficiencies, really as a test. Basically, they think that, look at how unattractive I am. Are you really still interested? Are you sure you want to be with me? I mean, from one side, you can look at it as some kind of self-sabotage, but from the other side, it's also saving time. They basically think that, look, you're warned up front. It's better that you know now than that you would find out later and that you complain then. Of course, also here the subtypes will play an important role, whether they want to be seen as a positive way or if they rather want to see with deficiencies. So what else can we say about the flirting of type 4? Well, first of all, they try to establish a very intense eye contact. And to some people this can feel creepy. So even those who are not sexual 4s can have this very intense eye contact. And they find it very important that the partner is able to hold this eye contact. So if you are having this eye contact with a 4 and you don't like it, and you turn your eyes away, this can actually be a turn off for the 4, and especially for the sexual 4. Another thing is that 4s are very affectionate and very sensual. So just like the 2s, they're quite often going to touch their hair, and also male 4s are likely to do that. Some 4s may actually pretend to be fun as a way to cover up their own sadness, but others want to show it more directly. Another element in the flirting is that 4s try to create a very deep emotional bond, and this can actually help the partner to really feel alive. And it may lead to a situation where the partner is actually going to really start missing the 4 for not being physically and emotionally nearby, because they really want to have this connection. Another thing is that 4s are so romantic in their flirtation, so they quite often will send poems to the person they like. They may send a link to some kind of piece of art that they saw that impresses them. Now, flirting is not always successful, so how does type 4 react? 4s will immediately shut down, and they will be immediately overwhelmed by feelings of shame, and it'll feel as if they did something wrong, as if they crossed a boundary they shouldn't have crossed. So they will become very quiet and they just withdraw. And a similar dynamics actually happens when they see that the person they're interested in flirts with somebody else, because the 4 wants to be unique. They want to be the only recipient of this special attention. So if they see that the person they're interested in is flirting with somebody else, that's going to be a major turn off, and they may shut down immediately. There's one final thing that I want to talk about that is very important in the flirting dynamics of type 4. 4 somehow internally distinguish between sexual flirting and emotional or psychological flirting. For many 4s, flirting is a way of relating. It's a way of creating a close bond. So it does not necessarily have to be sexual. So 4s can use flirting as a way of signaling interest, be it sexual or emotional. So 4s may actually flirt just to make somebody feel comfortable, and they can even flirt with somebody of the same sex. It's just a way of showing some kind of interest without there being any sexual intentions or sexual attraction. And 4s are not going to call this flirting, but they will just call it establishing close emotional contact. So for people who are not a type 4, most will actually equate emotional intimacy with sexual intimacy, so it can very easily be misinterpreted and lead to unfortunate situations. The last type I want to discuss in this video is type 9, which is also a withdrawn type, and this is quite visible in their flirting, especially for those that are sexual blind. Those sexual blind 9s tend to be too shy to really flirt, and they really need to be picked up by somebody else. They also don't really like the thrill of the chase. Very often they don't even know who they are really attracted to because of this self-narcotization that is so peculiar for the type, and also because they don't really tend to be very present. So also most 9s don't really have an idea or an image of what the ideal partner would look like. It seems as if they're not really thinking about that. Sometimes 9s are actually attracted to people who are, let's say, not conventionally attractive. Basically because these people tend to be not full of themselves, and that's something that 9s really like. 9s also tend to like people who are a little bit more reserved. So when they're in a room, they can be more attracted to those who are a little bit more quiet. And they may even give some kind of eye contact, hoping that that person would actually come to them. Now, when somebody starts flirting to them, 9s tend to be generally responsive and they engage, although it's a little bit passive, of course. But as they have this kind of self-narcotized state, they quite often have some kind of delayed emotional reaction, you could say. And sometimes they don't even notice when somebody's flirting with them. It seems as if they have some kind of insensitivity towards it. For example, there was one male self-preservation 9 who said that there was once a girl coming up to him, and she told him that she thought he was attractive and that she was drawn to him. And somehow this guy still didn't get it. He just thought that she was just being nice to him. So she really had to go straight up to him and really ask, like, look, are you also interested in me? Because until then he just didn't realize it. So 9s actually can also feel a little bit awkward if somebody flirts with them. It's as if they feel as if they're not really worth all the attention. They're not worth that somebody would actually look at them. 9s also don't like the classical ways of flirting and seducing because they find it somehow not really natural, not really honest. And they don't like flirting openly because they also don't want to be at the center of attention. And too much attention feels threatening to them. Quite some 9s actually say that they don't really like flirting. They can find these conventional ways of flirting a little bit like phony, but actually in reality they do like flirting. They do like playing with the sexual energy. They like this playfulness, and they like getting the attention. So although nines may have this kind of innocent appearance, they actually really love flirting. They're just afraid that they're not good enough. They're afraid that the attention is not going to be reciprocated. Now, one other important element here is that remember that in the beginning of this module I said that in order to find a sexual partner, some people seduce, others flirt, others pay for sex, others are unfortunately going to coerce somebody into a sexual relationship. But I actually forgot one. And a very common way for type 9 to meet somebody and enter into a relationship is it just happens. Nines just happen to fall into relationships. If you ask many nines, like, how did you meet your spouse? They just say, well, I don't know, it just happened. There was some kind of interest and things automatically happened and we're still together. We just went with the flow. Of course, not all flirting leads to marriage. It can also just lead to a one-night stand, for example. And also here, things can just happen. It is not uncommon for a type 9 to end up in a sexual relationship with somebody, whereas they didn't really feel this emotional connection. They didn't really want it. It just happened. I mean, they were in a connection and they were interested in a guy, and they were just feeling bad to say no to the person. So nines can actually sometimes put their own feelings aside up till the moment that they no longer can bear it and they get angry, but by then there may have been sex already. So if nines are not okay with a person who is flirting with them, they may actually also still engage in a way as if they look interested, but in reality they're not at all. They just don't know how to say no, and they also struggle with rejecting somebody's advances. So even when they don't want to date somebody, they may still go for it because somehow deep inside themselves they know that, well, in 2 months' time the other person is going to realize it and he's going to break up with me, and at least then I don't have to do it. So quite often they're just being nice and they go for things longer than they should just because they don't want to have these uncomfortable discussions. So the only way for a 9 to say no is basically to indirectly slip away politely. So for example, if they're meeting in a bar, then they can just go to the restroom and actually not come back. Or if they meet online, they may just not answer emails or phone calls or messages or anything like that. And the same happens also with relationships that are actually at the end of their expiry date. Breaking up is very difficult for everybody, but especially for type 9. They just hope that the other one will take the lead, that the other one is going to break up so that they don't have to bring the bad news. So quite often they may stay longer in a relationship. They may just stay in a relationship that is actually dead for a year already. Now, so far I was mainly speaking about 9s who are maybe a little bit sexual blind or have a rather weak sexual instinct. Those who are sexual dominant may be a little bit different because they are more prone to know who they are really attracted to, and they can actually put their shyness away and really initiate flirting. Interestingly, some of these sexual 9s may look a little bit asexual or demure, but actually they could spin somebody down the wall and start kissing that person. So 9s with a stronger sexual instinct tend to be a bit assertive. And when they go to a party, they just may scope everything out. They may go to somebody they're interested in, start talking, plant some seeds, go to somebody else, plant some seeds there, speak to that one, and then towards the end of the evening they're just going to see which seeds have grown. So sexual 9s can be a bit more confident, and they can and they actually like to have the upper hand in flirting. They're not so afraid of showing their interest, and they often know what the ideal partner to them looks like. And also here, the nine-ish inertia may come up because they can be pretty stubborn. I mean, once they go for something, they're not going to stop very easily. They're going to put all their assets into the flirting game. Now, regardless of the difference between the sexual dominant or somebody with a rather weak sexual instinct, there is many commonalities for all types 9, and that is that they really try to create some kind of positive human relationship with a prospective partner, and that they also want to avoid conflict at any cost. The flirting strategy of type 9 really focuses on giving attention, spending quality time together, having deep conversations, and very much offering a compassionate and listening ear to the other person. So they're really doing things that make the other feel good. So they have lots of commonalities with types 2 and 4 actually. So it's actually very easy and pleasant to have a conversation with a type 9, and you're really going to feel very much at ease because they give lots of validation. Mainly because 9s present themselves as very unassuming, they're smiling, they're humorous, and they flirt in a very subtle and indirect manner. So that's why it can be very difficult for some of the more direct types to actually understand what is really happening there. Another way for pleasing the partner is actually by showing a interest in the crush, by taking over, I would say, by taking over the interests of the crush and use that as some kind of common ground. But the downside of that is that 9s can actually merge too much with the partner and they can lose themselves too easily. And unfortunately, that can be a little bit like creepy and suffocating for the partner. There's also quite a few things that 9s very much dislike in flirting, and that's basically blatant flattery. And they also don't like generic questions. They don't like small talk or openly sexual advances. Also, remarks about their appearance comes over a little bit like as cheap, and also pickup lines is something that doesn't go well with them. They also don't like anybody who's like too bold, or somebody who's invading their space is not appreciated at all. So for type 9, it's very important to connect with the other person at a real level, basically. Now, sometimes it can be very difficult to understand if the 9 is flirting or genuinely interested in the other person, especially if the 9 is not sexual dominant. Just because 9s are so open to others, they listen well, they're very receptive, they have this genuine friendliness. Now, all of this doesn't mean that they are interested in the other person for a relationship. It doesn't mean that they have some kind of sexual desire. For many other types, it's very difficult to disconnect interest in a person from sex. But for 9s, this is very easy. I mean, they just love humans without having to engage sexually. So here we can see some kind of parallel with what we already discussed for type 4. So 9s are genuinely interested in people. I mean, to them, understanding people is something fascinated. But if they are really interested in somebody sexually, then they're most likely going to show it somehow through some kind of subtle touch. Also, the conflict avoidance is something that's very interesting and very important. If a 9 knows that a friend is also attracted to somebody they like, the 9 may actually make themselves unavailable because they don't want to have some kind of conflict with their friend. And of course, cultural and religious factors play a huge role. I mean, what I have been discussing so far is mainly about people in our Western society. But nines that are living in a conservative society can be quite different, of course. I mean, nines in a more restrictive setting may come across a little bit more as old-fashioned, and many nines actually stay a virgin until quite late, and the main reason is because they're basically so withdrawn that they don't engage actively in seeking a potential partner.